In this video we're just going to show how to change the wall type and add a floor. So we've already drawn our exterior perimeter. I'm going to show you how to change this exterior wall type. And just note that if we make sure that all of your walls are set to finish face exterior and that the location line is actually set to the exterior boundary, which we did that in the other video. So I'm going to highlight all of the walls, edit the type either by the shortcut command or over here on the properties palette. I am going to, before I go to edit the type, I'm going to duplicate. So I'm going to duplicate this wall type because I want to leave this one alone. Although it doesn't really matter, because if you aren't going to be using it, then there's no reason to have multiple ones. But just for the purpose of this, let's say we already have this wall type in use somewhere else, and it's a good idea just to duplicate, just in case you're not sure if you're using it somewhere else. I'm going to make this 6-inch wood stud with lap siding. And so now we have a new wall type. We preserved our 6-inch exterior ephes wall. Then we'll go into the edit type, which is on the structure layer here. The first tab, hit edit. I'm going to delete this thermal air layer because we don't need this on this wall type. And this finish exterior insulation, we're going to change that to siding. So we're going to need to create, and actually we already did that in that other video, so you could follow that other video to create this lap siding, or you can go down here, which creates a new material. We'll just do this, another one, just for this purposes. Do siding. Let's do 8-inch lap siding. Now we have a new material with just the basic generic appearance. Select the siding or the material you want to change. Click this asset browser. Go to your appearance library. Choose siding, and we'll do 8-inch smooth. Click this little arrow next to it. If you hover over it, you'll see replace this current asset in the editor with this asset. So we'll replace that. You can close out of here. You don't have to close out of it, but it kind of gets in the way. So you could leave it open if you wanted. But so it creates that siding. I'm going to leave it this gray color, and we'll use this background as solid. So this we're changing the appearance of what it looks like in an elevation. So we'll change this to solid fill, this 120, 120, 120 RGB value gray. We'll this is the cut pattern. I don't really want a cut pattern for the lap siding at this point, so I'm going to change that none, and we'll change the surface pattern to be solid. So the foreground pattern we'll make black. We'll do a model fill pattern, and then we'll have a 6-inch parallel, but we want this to be 8-inch, so we can just duplicate this fill pattern. We'll call it 8-inch parallel. Make it 8-inch line spacing under here, under the spacing. Hit OK, and then that's how we'd make this 8-inch parallel. But I'm going to use this 6-inch lap siding. For this, let's make it the lighter gray. So just assign the siding that you want for this exterior layer. And the exterior siding is going to be about 3/4 of an inch. So we'll add that, change that value to 3/4. We're going to change this to 0.5 inch sheathing. And we're going to leave it like this, so that we'll change this to 5.5 inches and change this to softwood lumber, just so we have the look of that we want. We'll change the cut pattern to be the same value that it is for the render appearance, and 134. For this stud, let's use this wood 1 for the cut pattern. And we don't care about the surface pattern because you're not going to see the wood stud. There's going to be gypboard or the siding over the top of it. So hit OK. For this gypsum wallboard, let's change the material and the cut pattern to be a dense sand pattern, so it shows up better. And all of this you can change if you don't like it. If it ends up being too dense or of a pattern, or you just don't like the colors, these are all global, so you can change them on one spot, and it'll change everything everywhere. It'll change all the patterns everywhere. So for this plywood, we're going to give it a RGB value similar to the rendering, so that when it's cut, it'll look like it's like plywood, and we'll give it a solid background pattern, and we'll leave black for the foreground pattern, and we'll put in this plywood cut pattern, so that when we cut it, it'll actually look like plywood. Hit OK. Again, we don't need a surface pattern because it's all going to be covered up. Alright, now we got our wall type modified and changed. And then notice these dimensions that we put. Because we're showing that they're the finished face exterior, it should not affect any of our exterior dimensions. So once we hit OK, all the dimensions change, and you can see it pulled the wall type towards the exterior instead of pulling it in. If we had left it with the interior finish face, it would have shrunk or increased our dimensions out here. So now we have our wall types. Here it looks like I didn't set the solid color for the wood. So if we wanted to set that again, we can go back into the wall type, softwood lumber. See, I forgot to set the pattern to solid. So we have the color, but the pattern needs to be solid or it won't show up. Hit OK. And then now we should see that color in the background. So that's how you would change the wall type when you have your walls already laid out. Next, we'll get into adding a floor. So for the floor structure, under the structure tab, we have we can create a floor. If you do this arrow, you can do a structural tab or a structural floor or an architectural floor. And you can find the same ones under the architectural tab. So you go to floor, architectural, or structural. So we'll just hit this, let's hit the structural floor. Sure, we'll save the project. It's a good idea to constantly save, just in case you're getting, if you have stability problems, you don't lose a lot of work. So this preloaded floor is in here, and I'm just going to use this 10-inch wood joist with the wood finish, but I'm going to modify this as well. So when you're in here laying out the walls, it's going to want you to draw boundary lines. There's several ways to do that. If it's a rectangular building, you can have this rectangle, you can have circular, all these different options. You can just draw lines if you wanted, but the quickest way is either to pick line, which allows you to create the lines by picking, just by tabbing or picking, and it'll create your line wherever you want it. And when you're in this view, you can select and delete anything because it's like in an editor mode, so you can't actually modify the exterior. So if you've picked your lines and you want to delete them, you can just easily window over and delete them. I'm going to use this tool here though that adds sketch lines based on existing walls. So this will allow me to tab and then pick, and it will create the boundary for me. And it puts it right where I want to have my floor. My floor line will extend out here. You can see it's completely created your boundary, and then you can just hit OK. If you were having sloping floors, or you can have different other options here to add a slope line and then define this slope. We don't want this to be sloping, but if you're making a ramp, you would probably use those options. And then we could also have a span direction. So if you have like a metal deck in here, like on a commercial construction, you can actually hold over here and it'll read, it says specifies boundary of the line. So in this case, the span direction would be this way if you had the metal deck, but we want it to actually always span the short direction. But since we're not using a floor deck, a metal deck, then we don't really need to add that. Basically, it'll add a layer in there that's accurate to showing a corrugated metal deck for either a roof deck or a concrete filled floor deck. It allows you to have the direction of the deck going the correct way. So once we're done with that, we can hit OK, and now it's created our floor. If we go into our section view, you can see that now we have a floor boundary in here. Because I use this existing floor type in here, we can edit the type and see what it's made up of. I'm going to delete this finish oak floor layer because I want it to just be this plywood sheathing. This is just our structural floor. We can add a floor on top of that for any of the materials that we want to use on top of the floor. But for this, I just want the plywood sheathing and then the joists, the 10-inch joists, which are this 9¼ inch deep joists. So I'm going to click on this finish, delete, and then notice that because this floor is set to level 1, it automatically pulls it up so that the plywood layer is the top layer. So for floors, the top of the floor is set at this level. If we wanted it to be higher, we can set an offset. And you can give it a negative value if you wanted it to sit at a certain distance below the line. But in this case, I want the stud to sit right on top of the plywood. When you've gotten your book, this condition is located under the crawl space construction. You can see this wood construction, which is pretty typical. You got your floor, your wall sitting on top of your floor, your plywood layer, then they've got their last joists, blocking, and in this condition they've got rigid insulation all sitting on top of a stem wall on top of this footing. And so that's what we'll end up creating. And as far as structure goes, as long as you have a foundation, easiest is slab on grade to draw, and we can look at that later when we take a deeper in depth of the foundations. But for this, I'm going to do wood joist because that'll be common around our area. And so now that we've got our floor, we've got our wall types updated, you can also, once you've added a floor, obviously it shows up in all the views. And then one last thing we can do, and all these things can be modified later. So it gives you a span direction too, which you can delete that for now. We should be able to put it back in later if we need it. But I don't need it at this point because that'll be more for the structural, because I'm actually going to put in the structural joists on this. So if you go to your structure tab, you can go to beam systems, and then over here we're going to create the same kind of boundary that we did for the floor, but now we're going to actually put in joists. Here's where the joists are loaded. So if you go to the beam type, there's only these wide flange beams loaded, but we're going to put in a different beam where we don't want to use wide flange beams. We'll use the 9 1/4 like we did for our roof type, or for our floor type. So if you go to the Insert tab, Load Family, this is where we're going to find all of our pre-load or pre-done families for Revit. So typically there's I think when you install Revit, it adds their Imperial library, and the beams are found in structural framing. So beams and joists, any horizontal members basically is under structural framing. They have concrete, light gauge steel, precast concrete steel, and wood. And so we'll want wood, and we'll want dimensioned lumber. Open. It will open up a dialog box showing all the different families that they've created. You can actually even add more than this if you wanted. But for this exercise, we just need the 2 by 10. You can see that the nominal size is the 9 1/4 by 1.5 inch. And hit OK to load that in. If you wanted to load in some more, if you thought you might use 2 by 8, 2 by 6, 2 by 4 joists, you can load those all on at one time by hitting OK. And it will load these into the family. So now when you click this beam type, it gives you all those different types that we just loaded. So I'm going to do dimension lumber 2 by 10. And then I'm going to go back to the Modify tab, because now we're in this still thing where we're trying to create the boundaries, and we'll pick this line. We'll choose it by picking lines. And so what we'll do is we'll pick let's just pick this exterior and we'll offset. Yep, let's just pick the center because that's what it's going to want us to pick. And we can look at different ways to pick things later. What we can do now that it's picked the center of this wall, so if you don't want to redo your boundary, this would be a good time to show you how to just use offset. So we can get the distance that we want to offset, which is 2 3/8 because it's the center of this wall. Pick offset, or type O. What do we say, 2 3/8? Change the offset to 2 3/8. And we don't want to make a copy. We just want it to offset all the lines, basically move all the lines. So if you hover over the line that you want to offset, hit Tab. See how it highlighted all of the chain, and you see the light dashed blue line? That's where it's going to put it. So if you hover towards to the inside, it's going to try to put it on the inside, but that value is greater, so we want it on the outside. We want it on that face of stud layer. So we'll tab, we can see that it's going in the right place, and then you just pick, and now we've set our boundary to be the face of stud. And there's several ways to do this. Looking in here, again, like the floor generation, there's lots of different ways to draw it. Here it says you can pick supports, so add sketch lines based on existing structural walls and beams. Select structural walls and beams to define the sketch lines. Sketch lines will be placed at the center of the selected item. So that would be if you wanted to use any structural that we've already put in here. And so let's set the beam direction. So as you can see, we'd have the joist running in this direction, which would not be practical. So we'll set the joist direction this way. Once we hit OK, it's actually going to populate all of our beam joists, or all of our floor joists. And as you can see, it's actually in the plywood layer. But right now we have this whole beam system selected. We can hit negative 0.75 inches, and it will move all of our beams down into the correct location. So if we try to change these again, so with the beam system, because they're set up as a system, you can either pick the individual beams or select the entire beam system, which if you hover over the 3D view, it's like at the top line, you can see, if you hover over something, you can see it's structural beam system. It'll tell you on the screen here, and it'll also tell you on the bottom left of the screen as well. So you can pick that, and I say that we should put them at, let's put them at a 24 inch, oops, that's a 24 foot, 2 foot, or 24 inch spacing, and so now we've got our joists at a 24 inch spacing. Here you can do a fixed distance, which will be a 24 inch spacing throughout. Fixed number, so you would define how many joists are in here. So it would only put 6 joists in this span. We don't want to do that. Fixed distance is good. Maximum spacing too will also give you joist spacing, and it will adjust it based on the maximum spacing. But I'm just going to do a fixed distance of 24 inches on center. Its justification is the center, so right now it's starting in the center and working its way to the exterior using the 2x10, and then at any time, so if we get our structural drawings and they're saying, hey, you want to use a 2x12 to span these distances, you can change it really easily here. So hit by 2x10. Let's grab our floor back again and see if there's any other things. Let's edit the type. Let's see what options we have in this type. So right now there's no really additional settings that you can edit in the frame system family. And so that's how you would create your floor joists. So yeah, that's how we'll adjust the walls type. Once we've got our walls in, we'll add our floor, and then we'll add our floor joist system. So let's say you wanted to, now that we've got our floor joists in here, you don't necessarily need this space, because it's really just holding a space for these actual joists. So you can go back in later, edit the floor type, and for this case I'm going to duplicate just so I can keep my the type that I've already used. So I'm going to just do, I'm going to have my floor layer just be 3/4 inch plywood. Delete this other layer. Now I've quickly and easily just gone in and deleted the joist layer that was representing all these joists, because now I have all of these actual joists in here using that beam family. So I think we'll call that lesson good for now, and we'll go in here and figure out how to start putting in this stem wall next. So yeah, I think that's what we'll do. So anyway, thank you for watching, and we'll catch you on the next video. Thanks.